For many Singaporeans, a cup of kopi is more than just a caffeine fix. It's a cherished ritual weaving together diverse culture and history. So join Renjie and me as we delve into the reality behind this kopi obsession.
Imagine it's, 8 a.m. in the morning, you're really groggy, you've dragged yourself out of bed. I know you are a morning person, but you've dragged yourself out of bed, let's say after a long night out. What is your go-to coffee?
Well, for me, coffee's always been changing, Renjie. I started with just a single shot of espresso. Then I graduated to an Americano. The last few days, I've been craving a Subko Cortado.
That's very specific.
Yeah, like a Cortado is something that is for me. But
yeah.
What about you?
I do love me a good Subko Cortado. But I will say that as someone who's grown up in Singapore, my go-to coffee is actually something called a Kopi-Peng-Siu-Dai.
Kopi-Peng-Siu-Dai.
Yes.
Break it down for us.
Okay, because it's not English.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not English. It's actually a mixture of the different languages that you find in Singapore. And coffee is so central, I think, to our lifeblood, literally. The blood coursing through our veins is caffeinated. That we've developed a whole language around it that's a composite of a few different languages. So kopi means coffee. It's what we call coffee in Singapore.
Okay.
And Peng is Hokkien, which is a Chinese dialect that means ice, right? So it's an iced coffee. And Siu-Dai is Cantonese, another Chinese dialect, which means less intense, right? So essentially what it is less sugar and less evaporated milk. So Kopi-Peng-Siu-Dai is like a slightly sweetened iced latte, if you will. And there's a whole, again, set of language terms built around sort of the culture of ordering a coffee that draws on Malay. So for instance, if you don't want any sugar in your coffee, you say Kopi-Kosong.
Kopi-Kosong.
Kosong. And Kosong means empty in Malay, right?
Yeah.
So it literally means no sugar whatsoever. If you wanted to do like coffee with, let's say, only evaporated milk but no condensed milk, so it's not so sweet, you say Kopi-C. And C is Hainanese, which is another Chinese dialect, for fresh. I guess because condensed milk is less fresh than evaporated milk. I don't know. But yeah, so that's my go-to coffee order.
So you mentioned kopi, right? Let's stick to kopi, and kopi is coffee.
Yes.
Now, in Singapore, I know that you will find regular coffee and you will find something called kopi.
Yes.
So how can a traveler like me or someone who's going to Singapore for the first time really distinguish between the two?
Yeah. Okay. So I will say that the coffee, in the Western sense of the word coffee, is a very recent introduction, right? So what you do end up seeing is, although this is also changing, is typically the kinds of places that sell like your lattes and your Americanos and your ristretto, those are going to be more contemporary, like minimalist, sort of cool, third wave coffee roasters, like a Subko, like a Blue Tokai, right? But the traditional places that you find traditional kopi in is going to be in coffee shops, right? These are very traditional coffee shops. It's going to be in hawker centers, so there's usually a coffee store or a couple of coffee stores in a hawker center. And even in shopping malls, you're going to find a couple of places that look very obviously like a traditional coffee shop, done up very nicely, but in a very sort of traditional way. And these are like Ya Kun Kaya, for instance, which is a coffee shop. Killiney, Kopitiam, another coffee shop. Toast Box. So they're everywhere. Every shopping mall has some version of this, right? So it's not difficult to tell the difference. But did you know that there's an actual ingredient difference between coffee and kopi?
I did not know that.
Okay,
what
so
is it?
Similar to how India has South Indian filter coffee, right? In Singapore, our coffee is not made with Arabica beans. It's made with Robusta beans.
Okay.
And this is because Robusta grows very well in Southeast Asia, in the climates of Southeast Asia. So in Singapore, we've had trade for a long time with both East and West. And we've obviously had trade with Arab traders for a long time. So we've been exposed to Arabica for a long time. But we drink Robusta as the coffee bean of choice because it's what grows very well in Southeast Asia in our sort of equatorial climate, and particularly in Indonesia, where we've historically, and even today, I would say, get our beans from. So it's Robusta beans instead of Arabica beans. It's also roasted with sugar as well as with margarine. which is
Wow, that's very different, right?
exactly, yeah. So it's roasted for about half an hour, high temperature, with sugar and margarine, because that kind of rounds out a lot of the sharper, sort of intense flavors of Robusta into a cup that is very rich, that is very fragrant. It's also twice the amount of caffeine, I recently learned, as Arabica. So, I mean, if you go around and look at Singaporeans, they're all wired because we're all on just like intravenous shots of caffeine.
You
into our
started
blood.
the episode with a light iced coffee,
Yes,
right?
yes.
But now you're saying that it's very strong.
So even if it's light, it's
Yeah.
light in terms of sugar. It's light in terms of milk.
Okay.
But essentially, it means that it's a more intense coffee actually because it's less like cut with sweetness and with milk.
That's why everyone's walking around so fast in Singapore, right? If
Exactly,
you
and our
look at the-
pupils are dilated. We're like, ready to go.
So one final question, Renjie. What goes well with the Kopi? Because with my coffee, I either like a croissant
Yeah.
or a pain au chocolat.
Yeah.
So like apart from these, what is Singaporean when it comes to accompaniments with coffee?
Yeah, so
Or
the coffee,
yeah.
exactly. The coffee culture in Singapore started with the Hainanese community. So my paternal grandfather is Hainanese, and he came over to Singapore as a chef.
Yeah.
And a lot of the Hainanese community started out in F&B in Singapore because they were a later set of migrants, and a lot of the more important, commercially sort of successful industries were already taken up by the other more older migrants, right? So coffee shops were started, and the whole coffee culture was started by the Hainanese community. And a very important cornerstone of Hainanese breakfast culture is kaya.
Oh, yeah.
Which, like I mentioned earlier, yakun kaya. Kaya is very much associated with Singapore. It's essentially jam that's made with egg yolk. It's made with coconut milk, and it's made with pandan, which is obviously this like really gorgeous, grassy, nutty herb that we have in Southeast Asia. And we have it with toast.
Yep.
So it's sort of very thinly sliced toast that's toasted, I guess, on the charcoal stove. Very nice and crunchy, crispy, and then slathered with kaya and a cold slab of salted butter. Very important. That goes amazingly with a cup of coffee.
On my last trip to Singapore, I really had a chance to try a kaya toast.
Yeah.
It was like a red-eye flight, and
Yeah.
I'm in Singapore, dead. Go to Orchard Road, morning, kaya toast and kopi.
Yeah.
That was amazing. So, Renjie, we've spoken about kopi. We've disintegrated the entire kopi
Yes.
culture. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is something that I will use three words for.
Okay.
One is seafood,
Okay.
spicy,
Okay.
and very local. Try guessing what it's going to be about, and on the next episode, I will tell you what it is. And I'm going to put you on the spot because this is one of my favorite dishes in Singapore. Awesome.
Okay, these are the three words that literally I think about on a daily basis. At night, when it's a cold, lonely night, I think about spicy seafood and very local.
So let's find out on the next episode
Amazing.
what it's about.